My name is Alara Whitford, and I turned 28 last spring. People often describe me as steady, the sort of woman who listens more than she speaks, who notices details others overlook. Tonight, that steadiness felt like a weight. We were gathered in my parents' restored townhouse in Savannah, its high ceilings and polished wood floors glowing under the chandelier. The table stretched long, covered in linen and silver that gleamed as though it had been set for royalty. Laughter traveled around the room, glasses clinking, forks scraping plates of roast chicken and candied yams. I sat midway down the table, between my aunt and a cousin I barely knew. The conversation flowed around me without touching, a current I had no part in. Then my father rose to his feet, his glass lifted high, his eyes shone, already fixed on my sister at the far end of the table, to the daughter who made us so proud. He boomed, the words filling every corner of the room. The applause was instant. My mother dabbed her eyes. An uncle whistled, and my sister blushed as though she had been crowned. For a moment, the clapping covered everything, the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of feet, but when it quieted, I felt his gaze slide across the table until it landed on me. His smile held, sharp at the edges. Rehearsed. And you, he added, pausing long enough for silence to gather. When will we say that about you? The laughter collapsed. Forks froze midair. My chest tightened, though I leaned back in my chair, forcing a calm smile. Their faces waited for me to play my role again, the quiet shadow. But memories stirred. The crown she wore had always been mine to chase. I grew up in a house where pride had a face, and it wasn't mine. The mantel above the fireplace was crowded with shining trophies, each one carrying my sister's name in bold letters. Gold and silver cups lined up like soldiers, ribbons cascading in neat folds. Every photo on the walls showed her smiling beneath spotlights at recitals, graduations, pageants where she always stood front and center. I remember the first time I tried to add something of my own. I had just come home from a state debate competition, a ribbon clutched in my hand. My voice had been sharp, my arguments precise, the judges calling my performance outstanding. I placed that ribbon carefully on the mantel beside her trophies, hoping it might belong there too. The next morning, it was gone. I found it tucked into a drawer in my bedroom, never mentioned, never framed. Dad hadn't been in the audience that day. He was at my sister's dress rehearsal instead. Her wedding years later was spoken of like a royal coronation. The church was filled to the rafters, the aisle draped in white roses. My mother cried as though history itself were unfolding before her eyes. Photographers lingered for hours, capturing every laugh, every tilt of her veil. The pictures still hang in the hallway, commanding attention from anyone who enters the house. Meanwhile, my milestones passed quietly. A scholarship letter opened at the kitchen table, a job offer signed with trembling excitement, moments that dissolved into the background of her celebrations. It wasn't that I failed. I simply didn't sparkle the way she did. Even now, sitting at that dinner table with my father's question hanging in the air, the weight of those years pressed against my ribs. It was as if every clap, every toast, every framed photograph had built a crown so heavy it left no room for me beneath it. The crown my sister wore glittered in every corner of our home, but the weight I carried never shone. It lived in the quiet hours no one noticed, tucked into moments I never spoke of. When my mother's health began to slip in my early 20s, I was the one who drove her to late-night checkups. She never wanted anyone to know, insisting her fainting spells were just stress. So I kept the secret, waiting in sterile rooms while fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I held her coat, fetched her water, drove her home in silence. By the next morning, she was back to hosting brunches, smiling as if nothing had ever happened. The others saw her glow, not the tremor in her hands or the daughter who steadied her. When my father's business faltered, it wasn't my sister who noticed the unopened envelopes piling on his desk. I slipped money into his account more than once, just enough to cover the gaps. He never asked, and I never told him, but I saw the relief in his face when the bills stopped stacking. At family dinners, he still raised his glass to my sister's promotions, never pausing to wonder how mine kept him afloat. At work, I earned my own titles promotions fought for with late nights and endless weekends. Colleagues congratulated me. Supervisors recognized my persistence. Yet at home, no one asked about my job, no champagne waited. My victories lived in the shadows, swallowed by the glow of hers. I told myself it didn't matter. That strength wasn't supposed to be celebrated, just carried. But the truth pressed heavier each year. My sacrifices left no photographs on the walls, no stories retold at gatherings. They weren't trophies. They were invisible weights I balanced in silence. Sitting at that long table, my father's question echoing inside me, I thought of all the moments I had poured myself out without recognition. They had mistaken my steadiness for detachment, my quiet for emptiness. What they never understood was that their pride in her had been built on the scaffolding of my silence. The words hung above the table, heavier than the chandelier's glow. When will we say that about you? My father's tone had not carried curiosity, nor even hope. It had been a sentence wrapped in a smile, a verdict handed down as if my life had already been measured, weighed, and found lacking. No one spoke. The clatter of silverware had stilled. My aunt reached for her glass too quickly, the ring on her finger catching the candlelight like a flare, a signal to look away. My cousin coughed into his napkin, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Across from me, my mother busied herself with arranging her fork just so against the plate, as though precision could disguise avoidance. My sister sat at the far end, the crown of attention still glowing faintly around her. Though she couldn't bring herself to meet my eyes, she stared at the breadbasket, lashes lowered, pretending fascination with crumbs. I recognized that expression. It was the same one she wore as a child when she'd win another ribbon and I'd stand to the side, waiting for my turn that never came. She wasn't proud of me then. She wasn't guilty either, just complicit in the silence. It struck me then how many times this ritual had played out. A dinner table, a room full of witnesses, a glass lifted in pride for her, and me, the convenient shadow, swallowing the sting so the night could carry on unbroken. I had learned long ago that silence was survival, the only way to keep peace. But as I sat there, their faces waiting for me to play that role once more, I realized survival had carved me out of my own family story. The air thickened, pressing against my skin. My father's smile lingered, rehearsed, daring me to either bow beneath it or break it. I could feel the weight of decades collecting inside me, a tide rising higher with every heartbeat. For the first time, the thought flickered sharp and undeniable: if silence had kept me alive, it had also erased me. And maybe tonight, I was done disappearing. The glass in my hand felt cold, slick with condensation, the stem pressing a faint mark into my fingers. I had spent years gripping it politely, raising it when expected, smiling on cue. But that night, I let my hand drift downward. The sound it made when it touched the wood was soft, barely more than a click, yet it rang out louder than any toast. I straightened in my chair, my voice steady, quiet enough that they had to lean into it. Maybe when you stop comparing me to her. For a breathless moment, the table froze. Even the candle flames seemed to pause, flickering without movement. My father's grin faltered, his jaw working as though he had misheard. My mother's fork slipped against her plate, the scrape sharp in the silence. My aunt blinked quickly, darting her eyes between us as if she had stumbled into the wrong room. At the far end, my sister's cheeks flushed, but not with pride this time. She shifted in her seat, fingers worrying the stem of her wine glass, eyes fixed downward. Her composure cracked. the practiced poise slipping at the edges. It was the first break in the script we had all memorized. He would praise her. The family would laugh. I would stay quiet. Tonight, I had missed my cue, and the play had come to a halt. My father leaned forward, his voice lower now, tinged with warning. That's not fair. Alara, neither is spending my life as her comparison, I replied, calm as stone. The words surprised even me in their steadiness. I had imagined shouting, or tears, or shaking hands. Instead, my body held firm, every syllable placed with precision. My mother's eyes flicked toward me, wide with something between fear and recognition. She opened her mouth, then closed it, the napkin twisting in her lap, around us. The guests shrank into silence, unwilling to move, as though any sound might shatter the fragile balance teetering between us. The chandelier hummed faintly above, its light casting sharp shadows across the tablecloth. I felt them all staring, waiting for me to back down, to soften, to let the moment pass. But I didn't. For the first time in years, I had spoken without apology. And the silence that followed no longer felt like punishment. It felt like power, raw and untested, pressing at the edges of a life I had almost forgotten could belong to me. The silence stretched, a taut thread that no one dared cut. My father's hand hovered above his glass as if he might lift it again, but the words had already slipped out of my mouth and settled into the room like ash. His certainty faltered. The smile that had once commanded the table looked brittle now, too thin to hide the crack beneath it. My mother's fingers twisted the napkin in her lap until it wrinkled into a tight knot. Her eyes stayed fixed on her plate, but I saw the quick flicker of her lashes, the way her throat worked as though she had swallowed something sharp. She wanted this to pass, to smooth over as it always had. Only this time, it didn't, at the end of the table. My sister sat motionless. Her face, usually serene under praise, carried a shadow of something else, guilt, or perhaps the sudden recognition of her part in the story. She lowered her eyes to her wine glass, tracing the rim with her fingertip, her composure slipping in tiny fractures. The crown she wore so effortlessly seemed to tilt, no longer steady. In that silence, memories surged back with painful clarity. I remembered the whispered jokes at a birthday party years ago, when she leaned toward her friends and said, "She's not the family type," their laughter scattering like glass beads across the floor. I remembered the night of my scholarship award, when I had burst through the door clutching the letter, only to find the living room crowded with relatives celebrating her recital instead. No one looked up when I spoke. Each memory was a piece of evidence, scattered but undeniable, proof that the imbalance hadn't been imagined, it had been lived, day after day, until it shaped the way I carried myself at every table. Now, as I watched my sister's lashes tremble and my father's authority falter, I saw the truth for the first time. Their script was not unbreakable. The crown that had been polished and paraded for years was not indestructible. It wobbled, fragile under the weight of everything unsaid, and I realized with a clarity that felt like breath in my lungs I had been holding up more of it than I ever knew. The knot in my chest loosened as the words formed, solid and sharp. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Every time you praised her," I said, my hands resting still on the table, "you erased me." The sound seemed to ripple outward, knocking against the walls, stealing the breath from the room. My father's jaw tightened, a muscle flickering beneath the skin as though he could grind my words into dust. His hand stayed clenched around the stem of his glass, unmoving. A man desperate to hold his script together. My mother's eyes filled instantly, tears gathering faster than she could hide. She lifted her napkin as though to shield her face, but the fabric only trembled in her fingers. She had always been the one to patch over tension, to shush conflict with polite smiles and quick distractions. Now her silence betrayed her, the tears refusing to obey her command. Across from me, my sister flinched as though struck, her lashes lowered, but not fast enough to mask the glimmer of shame. For years she had worn her crown so easily, shining beneath their applause. But now, with my words laid bare, the crown looked heavy in her hands, her shoulders curled inward, her fingers drumming nervously against the table. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her confidence. I didn't stop. The tide had risen too high. "Do you know what it feels like?" I continued. "To bring home victories and watch them vanish in the shadow of hers? To be there in every silence, in every gap you ignored, and never once be enough to earn your pride." The chandelier hummed above, filling the pause. My father stared at me, lips pressed into a hard line, but his silence was louder than any defense. He had lost the room, and he knew it. My mother's tears slipped free, trailing down her cheek. My sister's shoulders sank lower, the guilt she once buried rising like smoke. I had named the wound, and there was no taking it back. The air was thick with it, the truth uncoiling across the table. Impossible to silence again. The words burned against my tongue. Heavy with every year, I had swallowed them back. But this time, I didn't let them dissolve. I leaned forward, steady and unshaken. "You ask when you'll be proud of me," I said, each syllable deliberate, sharp enough to cut through the air. "The real question is, when will you stop being ashamed of who I am?" The silence that followed was immediate, a vacuum that swallowed the room whole. The chandelier above seemed to hum louder, its crystal drops vibrating as if they, too, had heard the verdict. No one moved. My father's face drained of its practiced warmth, leaving only the hard lines of a man unprepared for defiance. His mouth opened slightly, then shut again, as if no answer could match the weight of the question. My mother's napkin slipped from her hands and fell into her lap. Her eyes glistened, lips trembling. But she said nothing. For years, she had been the keeper of peace, the one who smoothed over the sharp edges of my father's pride. But there was no smoothing this across the table. My sister's hand stilled on her glass, her shoulders hunched forward, her poise unraveling thread by thread. She wouldn't meet my eyes, not now, not with shame clouding her face. I sat in the silence, letting it stretch until it belonged to me. For once. It wasn't the silence of erasure, it was the silence of impact, of a truth too heavy to ignore. Every beat of my heart steadied me further, rooting me deeper in the chair that had never felt mine until tonight. The balance had shifted. The script was broken. And for the first time, the story no longer revolved around their pride. It revolved around my voice. The room remained frozen, their faces stiff with disbelief. When I reached for my napkin, I folded it carefully, smoothing each corner as though the moment deserved precision. Then I pushed back my chair. The sound of wood scraping against tile seemed louder than any toast that had ever filled this room. No one spoke as I rose. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. My sister's hands clutched her glass, the stem trembling between her fingers. My father stayed rigid, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed, as though silence might somehow return his authority. The chandelier glowed above us, throwing shards of light across their stillness. But it was no longer my cage. I walked from the table without waiting for permission, each step echoing louder than applause ever had. Behind me, I could feel their gazes clinging, desperate to pull me back into the script I had abandoned. But I didn't turn. That night, my phone buzzed endlessly. In the family group chat, the whispers had already begun, thinly veiled scolds dressed up as concern. "You embarrassed your father. You ruined dinner. A cousin sent a private text. "Are you okay?" The question carried more curiosity than care. Later, a message from my father arrived, clipped and cold. He hinted at the money I had quietly given years before, twisting it now into a weapon. "Be careful what bridges you burn. You may need them." I read it once, then set the phone aside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the panic of pleasing them, of patching the wound they created. I felt a strange, steady calm, like breathing after being held underwater too long. Walking away had cost me their approval, perhaps even their support. But as the night stretched quiet around me, I realized it had given me something I had never felt in their presence: freedom. Weeks slipped by, the sharp edges of that night softening but never disappearing. Savannah's evening air wrapped warm around me as I sat on a small balcony overlooking the quiet street. The live oaks swayed gently, their branches heavy with moss, the kind that always seemed to whisper history into the night. Beside me sat Claire, a friend who had never measured me against anyone. She poured 2 glasses of wine, her laughter bubbling over something small and silly we had remembered from college. No one was judging, no one was keeping score. The sound felt lighter than any applause I had ever chased. I thought of the decision I had made only days before to enroll in a course in historic preservation at the university downtown. It wasn't the path my family had scripted, not the polished story they would parade for relatives. It was mine, rooted in my love for old buildings, for the layers of stories etched into brick and wood. For the first time, I had chosen without waiting for their permission. Claire raised her glass, the amber catching the glow of the porch light. I lifted mine to meet hers. The clink was soft, private, carrying no expectation beyond the moment itself. I leaned back in my chair, the night sky stretching wide above us. The stars blinked faintly through the canopy. And for once, I felt no weight pressing me down. Pride didn't sit across the table anymore, deciding whether or not to offer me a sip. It lived here, in my chest, steady and undeniable. I raised my glass again, this time not toward anyone else, but toward myself, toward the woman who had finally stopped waiting to be chosen, and chose herself instead. "My name is Claire Whitman. I'm 29 years old, and for 6 months last year, I lived in my parents' guest room, the one with the stiff twin bed, the peeling wallpaper, and a closet that still smelled like Christmas decorations. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I didn't even unpack most of my boxes. I told myself I'd only be there until things settled. My mother, Susan, had other ideas. When I moved back in, I had just been laid off from a small nonprofit tech firm. Budget cuts, they said. I had spent 3 years helping community centers digitize their services, things like scheduling remote access for seniors, even helping veterans navigate online benefits. I was proud of that work, but once funding dried up, so did the job. I applied to everything I could find: remote jobs, contract gigs, even positions way below my qualifications. I took on freelance projects here and there, mostly web design and digital troubleshooting for local businesses, but the market was tight. My savings disappeared faster than I expected. Rent in upstate New York wasn't exactly forgiving, and in the end, I packed what I could fit in my hatchback and drove back to the same cul-de-sac I grew up on. Dad Harold greeted me like he would an unexpected house guest, polite, quiet, a pat on the back. Mom offered a tight smile and a list of things that needed fixing. The thermostat was acting up again, the printer jammed every 3rd page, and the Wi-Fi kept dropping around 8 p.m. I didn't complain. I set up new email filters for them, installed antivirus software, restructured their budgeting app, and updated their online banking security. I even flagged a fraudulent charge on Dad's debit card before he noticed. They never asked. They just assumed. Susan wasn't unkind, not in the obvious ways. She didn't yell or slam doors, but every morning she'd clean the already clean kitchen like she was erasing me from it. She'd fold laundry with sharp, precise movements, and when she passed by my room, she'd linger just long enough to let the silence do the talking. Eric, my younger brother, came by maybe twice a month. He's 25 lives in Manhattan and works in finance, or at least that's how he introduces himself. Mom lights up the second he walks through the door. "There's my star, she beams." "You look like you've lost weight." Meanwhile, I'm in the corner reconnecting the Wi-Fi router for the third time that week. No one said it out loud, but I could feel it building like steam under a lid. I wasn't home. I was a shadow passing through a reminder of something they didn't want to look at too closely. What I didn't know then was that the person they barely saw, the one folding laundry behind the scenes, fixing their passwords, quietly making dinner, was the same person their entire system was silently depending on. They wouldn't realize that until I left. It was a Sunday. The kind my mother used to call family days back when we still used placemats and had matching silverware. She made baked ziti Eric's favorite, not mine. He showed up in a pressed shirt and expensive-looking watch, greeted Mom with a kiss on the cheek, and tossed his keys in the bowl like he hadn't ignored her calls all month. Eric Whitman, 25. Younger by 4 years, but treated like he'd aged in reverse. He worked in Midtown for some private investment firm and always had some new app or crypto term to throw into conversation. Susan hung on every word. I set the table, careful not to chip the one dish with a crack down the middle. When I sat down, Eric looked at me like I'd just shown up uninvited. Dinner began the usual way, Mom asking Eric about work, Eric pretending to be modest. I tried not to say much, just focused on the food and kept my eyes on my plate. Then it came. Susan turned to me, voice overly casual. "Have you been applying to any real jobs lately?" I froze. I had told her just the day before that I had 2 interviews lined up this week. I even let her read one of my cover letters. But none of that mattered. Not when Eric was here. Before I could respond, Eric cut in without looking at me. At some point, it stops being bad luck and starts being bad choices. I swallowed my words and my pride. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick electric, but only for me. They kept talking. They laughed. At something I don't remember what. I carried my plate to the kitchen, stood at the counter, and ate the rest of my dinner with my back to the room. I could hear Snippet's needs to grow up. Can't cuddle her forever. Embarrassing. They didn't whisper. They didn't have to. What hit hardest wasn't the words. It was how easy they were to say. How natural, like they'd been rehearsed. That night, I lay in bed, eyes wide open, the same cracked dish sitting in the sink where no one else would touch it. And I started wondering, what exactly had I become in this house? The next morning was quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the type that hangs in the air like smoke after something's already burned. I was in the sunroom, hunched over my laptop, finishing the final tweaks on a website redesign for a local bakery. Their new spring menu was launching, and I had just uploaded the image carousel when I heard the sound heels on hardwood, quick, certain steps. Susan appeared in the doorway. My mother had a way of folding her arms that made them look like barricades. She didn't knock. She never did. "I need to talk to you," she said. I paused, looked up. "Okay, you need to start paying rent." I'd heard this before, usually tossed out between comments about the electric bill and the way I load the dishwasher. So I said what I always said. I will. "I told you once this job wraps, I'll send something." "They're paying you?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes." She tilted her head. "I'm not talking about someday. I'm talking now. Today." I blinked. "You want me to write you a check with money I haven't even received yet?" She didn't flinch. "No. I want you to grow up." And then it came. Clean, sharp, casual. "You're just a leech Claire, living off us. And it's gone on long enough." That word leech landed like a slap I wasn't ready for. She said it without blinking, like it was a diagnosis. Like I'd always been that. Before I could speak, she turned, disappeared down the hallway, and came back dragging a duffel bag I hadn't seen since college. She dropped it at my feet. "Go leech somewhere else." I stared at the bag. Blue canvas. Still had my name stitched on the side. I zipped it up, slid my laptop and charger in, grabbed my toothbrush. No scene. No yelling. When I stepped outside, the sky looked too blue for the moment, the driveway too clean. I left without goodbye. No one followed, no one watched, but as I walked to my car, I realized something. I hadn't just been cut out of the household, I'd been erased from it, and not one of them seemed worried about what would happen when I was gone. They should have been. I didn't have a plan. Just a duffel bag, a laptop, and a tightness in my chest I couldn't name yet. The first night I stayed with Lucas, an old college friend who still called me Whitman like we were in a group project. He gave me the pull-out couch and a pair of clean socks. No questions. No pity. Just enough space to breathe. After a few days, I moved into the spare room at Ava's, my ex-girlfriend, the kind of person who still made tea before asking how I was. We hadn't spoken in months, but when I texted her, reply was one word: come. That week felt like drifting between lives that used to be mine. Ava worked evenings at a community health clinic, so the apartment was quiet. I filled the silence with freelance jobs, small sites, repair gigs, whatever came through. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I fixed things, not just websites. I was fixing myself. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message on LinkedIn. A recruiter from a nonprofit startup had found my portfolio through a project I'd done for a local art professor months earlier. They were hiring for a digital systems role, remote, full-time, benefits. I interviewed in Ava's kitchen wearing a blazer over sweatpants. 2 days later, I got the offer. It wasn't a six-figure Silicon Valley gig, but it was enough. Enough to sign a lease on a studio apartment with creaky floors, a fridge that hummed too loudly, and sunlight that hit just right in the morning. That first night alone, I sat on the floor with takeout lo mein and a half-charged phone. No lectures, no silence, no one waiting to tell me who I wasn't. For the first time in years, everything around me was mine. The floor, the ceiling, the air. And nobody could throw me out of it. 3 weeks after I moved into my new place, I was sitting at my desk, barely more than a table with legs, finishing a grant reporting dashboard for the nonprofit. The radiator was hissing the overhead light, flickering slightly, but I didn't mind. Everything in that room, broken or not, was mine. That's when my phone buzzed. Missed call. Harold Whitman. My father. I hadn't heard from him since the night I left. Not a text, not a, "How are you?" I watched the screen go dark, then light up again. Second call. Same name. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text came through Claire. Why is the bank account frozen? I stared at it. For a second, I didn't understand. And then I remembered. Back when I was still living at home before I became a leech, Dad had asked me to help modernize their finances. He hated phone menus and paper statements. He gave me access to their joint account so I could set up mobile banking, automate their bills, link their tax filing software, and set recovery protocols. I became the secondary administrator on every system. Not to spend anything, just to troubleshoot. That access hadn't been revoked. If anything triggered a lockout, too many failed logins, suspicious activity, they'd need the secondary contact to verify identity. That meant me. I didn't respond right away. I imagined the scene clearly. Susan pacing the kitchen, arms crossed, voice sharp. Harold poking uselessly at the tablet, cursing under his breath, holding the phone too close to his face while talking to customer service. I typed out a reply. Ask the leech. No emoji, no explanation, just that. It only took an hour. My phone lit up like a slot machine. 5 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 1 message from Susan. This isn't funny, Claire. Call your father back. We can't pay the credit card. Are you really doing this after everything we've done for you? I didn't answer. I wasn't being cruel. I wasn't playing games. But for the first time in a long, long time, I had leverage. And I wasn't going to waste it. They showed up on a Thursday. I heard the knock before I saw them. My building has this echo, slow, deliberate footsteps that bounce off the hallway walls when someone waits too long at your door. I looked through the peephole and didn't move right away. Susan stood there, my mother holding her purse tight to her chest, like it might shield her from whatever was coming. Harold beside her wore a jacket too light for the weather and a tie that looked like it had been knotted in a hurry. I opened the door. If you're here to yell, don't. They didn't. They walked in without a word, glancing around the studio like they couldn't quite believe this was where I lived now. It was small, yes, but clean. Light streamed through the window and hit the stack of paperwork I'd left open on my desk. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Susan cleared her throat. Her voice was softer than I remembered. We need your help. 3 weeks ago, she'd called me a leech and thrown my bag at my feet. Now she stood in the center of my life, careful not to touch anything. Harold tried to explain, said something about the bank, about the taxes, about how Eric had tried to help, but made it worse. I already knew. I'd seen the alerts. We missed the mortgage payment, Susan added quietly. There are late fees. I looked at her. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. That sounds awful, I said. You must feel really stuck. She nodded, then almost in a whisper. I'm sorry. There was no lecture. No justification. Just those 2 words. Harold echoed her slower. We didn't realize how much you were doing. I believed them partially. I think they didn't want to know. There's a difference. They asked if I would come back, reset the systems, fix everything. They said they'd pay me for my time, that things would be different. I shook my head. I'll help, I said. But I'm not coming back, and I meant it. We spent 2 hours at my desk, Harold on one side squinting at the screen, Susan on the other, arms crossed but silent. I walked them through everything, resetting login credentials, verifying identity through secondary recovery codes, relinking the tax software. I had to call tech support twice, once to confirm a 2-factor code they'd ignored, once to unlock the HSA portal that Eric had accidentally flagged for suspicious activity. Susan didn't say much. Harold muttered under his breath every time a new security question popped up. This is ridiculous, he kept saying. But he answered them anyway. When it was done, I leaned back and looked at them. I'll send over a document outlining every step, and after that, I'm out. Susan frowned. Out. No more admin access, I said. No more late-night calls. No more Claire, the internet's down. You'll have to figure it out, or ask someone else. Maybe Eric. Harold didn't argue. He just nodded. Slowly. They stood, gathered their things. Neither reached for a hug. I didn't offer one. After the door closed behind them, I sat at my desk and opened my Google Drive. There it was, one last shared folder. Banking for Mom and Dad, do not delete. I hovered over it for a moment, then clicked, delete, confirm, gone. No pop-up asked me if I was sure, and I didn't need it to. For a few days, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe they'd respected the boundary. Maybe they'd let it go. But families don't really let things go. They just find new ways to spin the story. It started with a Facebook message from Aunt Cheryl. Hey, sweetie, heard you moved out on your own? That's so great. Your mom said you've been distant lately. Just wanted to check in. Everything okay? Then came a screenshot from Trevor, my cousin on Dad's side. He was in a group chat with some of the extended family. In it, Susan had written, Claire's changed. Ever since she got that new job, she's been cold, distant. I don't even recognize her anymore. All I did was ask for help, and she acted like I betrayed her. Then Eric, my brother, emailed. He hadn't said a word to me since the account meltdown. Now suddenly I got 5 paragraphs. Look, I know there's been tension, but Mom and Dad aren't perfect. Maybe instead of blaming them, you could try being more understanding. You had a rough patch. We all do. Doesn't mean the world's out to get you. Let's talk soon. Maybe coffee, I didn't reply. Because none of them understood. This wasn't about one fight, or one word. It was about all the times I was invisible until they needed me. A month later, I left New York. My company offered a relocation bonus to join their West Coast expansion, and I took it without hesitation. Portland felt like breathing. The apartment was small, but the light was soft, and no one in the building knew my last name. I joined a local tech meetup, made friends. Once a week, I volunteered at a senior center teaching people how to navigate email, digital banking, 2-factor authentication. One afternoon, I sat beside a woman named Marlene, walking her through how to reset her Medicare password. She laughed a little embarrassed and said, "You're so patient." I smiled. Patience is all I've ever had. That night, I sent one last email. Subject update. Hi, Mom and Dad. Just wanted to let you know I'll be relocating to Portland for work. I've removed myself from all financial systems and accounts. I won't be available for tech help going forward. I hope this new chapter gives us all some peace. Claire. No reply. Not even a period. But this time, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. I sat at my desk, opened a blank document, and wrote the first sentence of something new. Something mine. I don't need an apology. I just wonder if I disappeared, would anyone notice I was the one keeping things running? What about you? Have you ever walked away? And no one asked why. If you've ever been called a burden, just leave a single dot.